Happy New Year's. It's January the 1st, 2024, and I have a book that's turning 100 years old this year. It's called The Forgotten Man by Luther E. Todd. It's made by a denomination that no longer exists, the Methodist Episcopal Church South. It was formed back in the Civil War and stopped existing back in 1939 in a big merger of Methodist churches. But I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about this book because it's turning 100 years old this year. It's about circuit riders, which were evangelists for the Methodist Church back in the 19th century. And this is just an interesting look back 100 plus years. This was owned by this fellow in a Hurley. And I think it definitely shows how handwriting has deteriorated over the last 100 years because this was probably just some random country dude who had the bed, and he can write better than most people today. 1924, towards the end, this book is technically only 99 years plus a few months, but you get the point. It's turning 100 years old this year, and it's stayed in North Carolina all this time, so that's really interesting. I'm in North Carolina now. I bought this in North Carolina, so it's really interesting to know that after 100 long years that it has stayed in this state since it arrived here from Missouri. It's called The Forgotten Man by Luther E. Todd. I think it was intended to raise money for the most part and tell about the story of the circuit riders. This is the Board of Finance of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And one really interesting thing I want to show you is that all these faces are dead, long dead. They've probably been dead for at least 80, 90 years. But what I find really interesting about them is that actually all these men saw the 19th century. And some of these older guys, they saw the Civil War. Probably kids, but they did live through the Civil War. Probably on the Confederate side, if I had to bet, because Methodist Episcopal Church South. They weren't vets probably, but these men lived through the conflict. So I just find that really interesting. So these guys are, of course, long dead. Look how much better they dress. I bet if you had these guys today, they'd probably just be wearing, T-shirts and stuff. Probably would not be as serious. This is really interesting. Just names that are long dead. And then I found this very fascinating little image. It's called the Methodist Forgotten Man. It's just an old guy. Seemed to be an old man. He would be like 170 today, so that's really interesting. And then there ain't too much to talk about. Oh, look, there's a Luther E. Todd signature. That's really interesting. I am amazed that, apart from the low quality of the book, that the pages have honestly held up so long. I mean, these pages, if you haven't noticed, are in pretty good condition. They're all still pretty white. They haven't turned all yellow. It's all in pretty good condition. The cover is a little worn. You might be able to see over here, a little worn, but for the most part, it's in pretty good condition considering it's a 100-year-old book. So these guys are long dead. It's real neat. Little turn. And then this is what this book's about, is circuit riders. For those who don't know, these were major evangelists in the 19th century. They would go around, they would preach. And they were once a really big deal. Like, I think the same year that the president, President Coolidge, dedicated a statue of Methodist circuit rider Francis Asbury. It's the most famous one of all. He helped really spread Methodism in America, which became the largest church in America in the 1840s. And it was such a big deal that he got his own statue. Now, today in D.C., it's still there, but it's all worn down. It's all green. It's falling apart. No one cares about it. But for the time, this was a really big deal. And circuit riders were really a dying breed in the 1920s. They were big in the 19th century, but they were dying out, especially the advent of the car. Kind of makes riding around on a horse obsolete. And just the Methodism was changing. These guys would be considered hyper-conservative today, even among the global Methodist Church, which is the church breaking off over gay marriage, and I'm going to visit one soon. So if this video interests you, you'll probably like that video, so like and subscribe. But I find it really interesting that a lot of these churches, these very same churches that are breaking off today and joining the global Methodist or some other Methodist church or becoming non-denominationals, were the very same churches that joined the Methodist Episcopal Church South back in the Civil War. So I think it shows a very interesting conservative culture that the rural South has and continues to have all these years later. Ain't much to it. A little bit about families and the church. See, a bit later, this book was mostly intended to raise money, I think. But It talks about what would $10 million do. We'll get to that a bit later, but $10 million then is now worth $171.5 million today, and that's as of the beginning of 2024. With inflation, it'll be worth even more by the end of this year. So just keep that in mind, that times have definitely changed money-wise. This is also the year my great-grandmother was born. I actually knew her. She died back in 2020. I found that very interesting. We'll talk about her a bit later because I have something from, my great-grandfather, but we'll talk about that. Aftermath of Fruits of Service, Daybreak. And then this is real interesting, just this little old couple. Like, interviewing these people today would be like interviewing somebody that was really important, like back in the 1960s. Like, these people were probably about the same age about people born around World War II or something. They were 70 or 80 years old, so they were definitely getting old. This is just real interesting. These are some ministers. Look at these cool beards, except for that guy, but look at that. I think these are comparison shots. Yes, that is. So that's him when he's young. That's him when he's old. That's him when he's young, old. There's some of the circuit riders. This is real interesting to me. This is just going back in time, really. I find this an interesting little video. Forgive me if the camera shakes a little. I'm just holding this. And there ain't much to it. Some more photos of these guys, old men, circuit riders. This is what the kind of conditions they lived in. They definitely didn't make a lot of money doing this. They really were very passionate. They, I'm not mistaken, they weren't allowed to marry, so they just did that. I think maybe later they did. There's a guy who married. And there's a little kid. And think about that. That little kid is probably dead now. So warm you up, huh? This book isn't technically 100 years old. It's only like 99 in a few months, but you get the point. There's some bishops. And these guys are all long dead. Very much to this book, really. It's just a little information pamphlet by the Methodist Episcopal Church South. There's one of the little shacks they lived in. There's a circuit rider and his wife, I believe. This church didn't allow women to preach like the modern Methodist Church does. So it was just an all-male thing. And I just find this real interesting. It's a look back 100-plus years. There ain't much to it. Women are walking. This is just each little segment, really. And then this is a really interesting little illustration at the end. I think it's ironic because most churches in America are at a crossroads today, including the United Methodist, between whether to become more affirming and pro-LGBT, which I have a video on called The Church's Failed LGBT Bill. I'm sorry, it's early in the morning. I'm screwing up letters. But, yeah, this is really interesting. And there's a pretty little letter. I don't know why you wrote that there, but here's the book. And I actually have something else from that denomination. It's 10 years older, so same year the First World War started. It's the Book of Discipline, 1914, so it's 110 years old now. See, same church. Real interesting little book. And then here's I looked through it briefly. It's very thin for the most part. I mean, today's Book of Discipline is much fatter, and these are little pages at that. But that's real interesting. And that's a 110-year-old book now, same year as the First World War. And then I have this book. This is from the Methodist Church, which would form the United Methodist Church back in 1967 with a merger with the United Brethren. And this is, remember I was talking about my great-grandmother's. Well, this is my great-grandmother's, my great-grandfather's, who was born in 1923. He was dead by this point, not in 64, but I mean, he died before I was born. But this is really cool. It's notice how much fatter it got over the course of 50 years. Compare the two books. About similar size paper. This one's a little bit bigger, come to think of it. So this much fatter. These books are rarely worth anything. If I had to guess, I could fetch around $10 for them. But it isn't about what they're worth. They're important to me because they're historical documents, primary sources into the history of one of America's largest and most important faith traditions. If you like this video, like and subscribe. I am going to make another video on Methodism because I'm going to visit a global Methodist church, the conservative break-off denomination, and I'll tell you about that. Usually, most videos on the channel are either about the future or Christian universalism, which is the belief that hell isn't forever. If any of those things interest you, like and subscribe, or just like this and subscribe. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and Happy New Year's, and God bless.